beginning Chapter 4, very few patients benefit from the drugs they take, of deadly medicines and organized crime. I am sure this statement will surprise many patients who faithfully take their drugs every day, and I shall therefore explain in some detail why it is correct, using depression as an example. If we treat patients with depression in primary care with an antidepressant drug for 6 weeks, about 60% of them will improve. This seems like a good effect. However, if we treat the patients with a blinded placebo that looks just the same as the active pill, 50% of them will improve. Most doctors interpret this as a large placebo effect, but it isn't possible to interpret the result in this way. If we don't treat the patients at all, but just see them again after 6 weeks, many of them will also have improved. We call this the spontaneous remission of the disease or its natural course. It is important to be aware of these issues. At my center, we do research on antidepressant drugs, and I have often explained to the media that most patients don't benefit from their treatment. Leading psychiatrists have counter-argued that, although the effect is modest, the patients will benefit from what they erroneously call the placebo effect, which they exaggerated to be about 70%. Thus, there are 3 main reasons why a patient may feel better after having been treated with a drug: the drug effect, the placebo effect, and the natural course of the disease. If we wish to study the effect of giving patients placebo, we will need to look at trials where some of the patients are randomized to placebo and others to no treatment. One of my coworkers, Ashbjorn Hrobjartsson, identified 130 such trials in 2001, most of which had a third group of patients that received an active intervention, often similar in appearance to the placebo. Contrary to the prevailing belief that placebos have large effects, we found, much to our surprise, that placebo might have a possible small effect on pain, but we couldn't exclude the possibility that this result was caused by bias and not by the placebo. The bias we mentioned occurs because it isn't possible to blind patients. Okay, I'm right. The bias we mentioned occurs because it isn't possible to blind patients to the fact that they don't get any treatment. These patients may therefore become disappointed and tend to report less improvements than what actually occurred. In other words, in their depression or pain. Conversely, patients on placebo may tend to exaggerate the improvements, particularly in 3 arms trials where they don't know what they got, but they hope they receive active treatment rather than placebo. We have updated our results with recent trials and now have 234 trials investigating 60 different clinical conditions in our Cochrane review. We confirmed our original findings that placebo interventions do not seem to have important clinical effects in general, and that it is difficult to distinguish a true effect of placebo from biased reporting. You may wonder why I tell you so much about the effects of placebos and not drugs, but that's because drug effects are determined relative to placebo in placebo-controlled trials. And if the intended blinding is not impeccable, we would expect the reported effect of a drug to be exaggerated when the outcome is subjective, such as general mood or pain. So how often is the blinding not working? Quite often, for 2 reasons. First, trials called double-blind may not have been effectively blinded at the outset. As an example, Researchers that performed 6 double-blind studies of antidepressants or tranquilizers noted in all cases the placebo was different from the active drug in physical properties such as texture, color, and thickness. Second, even when drug and placebo are indistinguishable in their physical properties, it is usually difficult to maintain the blind during trial conduct because drugs have side effects. Antidepressant drugs cause dryness of the mouth. For example, I think that's EG. I'm trying to figure out what EG means. I should just look it up. But IE is, in other words, and EG is, for example, I believe. Because of these inherent problems in testing drugs, the true difference in the improvement rates of 60% and 50% on an antidepressant drug and placebo, respectively, in these trials is likely considerably smaller than 10%. But let's first assume, for the sake of the argument, that these rates are true and construct a trial such improvement rates. That didn't sound right at all. Oh, it's a mighty sentence. Because of these inherent problems in testing drugs, the true difference in the improvement rates of 60% and 50% on an antidepressant drug and placebo, respectively, in these trials is likely considerably smaller than 10%. But let's first assume, for the sake of the argument, that these rates are true and construct a trial with such improvement rates. We have randomized 400 patients in 2 groups, and 121 of 200 patients, 60.5%, improved on active drug, and 100 of 200 patients, 50% on placebo. Should we then believe that the drug is better than placebo, or could the difference we observed have arisen by chance? We may address this question by asking how often we will see a difference of 21 improved patients or more. If we repeat the trial many times, if the truth is that the drug has no effect. Table 41, results of a randomized trial that compared an antidepressant drug with placebo. Drug, 121 improved, 79 did not improve, out of a total of 200. Out of the placebo, 100 improved, 100 did not improve, out of 200. This is where statistics is so helpful. A statistical test calculates a p-value, which is the probability that we will observe a difference of 21 patients or more if the drug doesn't work. In this case, p equals 0.04. The medical literature is full of p-values, and the tradition is that if p is less than 0.05, we say that the difference is statistically significant and choose to believe that the difference we found is real. P equals 0.4 means that we could only observe a difference of 21 patients or more 4 times in 100 if the drug didn't work, and we repeated our trial many times. If 2 fewer patients had improved on active drug, in other words, 119 rather than 121, the difference would still be very much the same. 9 patients instead of 21, but the difference would not have been statistically significant. P equals 0.07. What this literature is that, quite often, a proof that a treatment works hinges on a few patients, even though, as an example, 400 patients were randomized, which is a fairly large trial for depression. It usually doesn't take much bias to convert a non-significant result into a significant one. Sometimes investigators or companies reinterpret or reanalyze the data after they have found a p-value above 0.05 until they come up with one below 0.05 instead. For example, by deciding that a few more patients had improved on an active drug or a few less on placebo, or by excluding some of the randomized patients from the analysis. This is not an honest approach to science, but as we shall see in Chapter 5 and 9, violations of good scientific practice are very common. Apart from such scientific misconduct, insufficient blinding can also make us believe that ineffective drugs are effective. Blinding is not only important when the patients evaluate themselves, but also when their doctors evaluate them. Depression is evaluated on elaborate scales with many subjective items, and it's clear that knowledge about which treatment the patient receives can influence the doctor's assessments in a positive direction. This was shown convincingly by Hirsch, Barjatson, and colleagues in 2012 using trials in a variety of disease areas that had both blinded and non-blinded outcome assessors. A review of 21 such trials, which had mostly used subjective outcomes, found that the effect was exaggerated by 36% on average, measured as odds ratio, when non-blinded observers rather than blinded ones evaluated the effect. This is a disturbingly large bias considering that the claimed effect of most of the treatments we use is much less than 36%. Thus, a double-blind trial that is not effectively blinded may exaggerate the effect quite substantially. We can try this out on our antidepressant example, assuming for simplicity that the binding is broken for all patients. To calculate the odds ratio, we rearrange the numbers so that a low odds ratio means a beneficial effect, which is the convention. See table 4.2. 4.2 states that out of the drug, 79 did not improve, 121 improved out of a total of 200. Other one is placebo, 100 and 100 improved. Half and half improved, not improved. Okay. The odds ratio for the significant effect is 79 to 100. 121 to 100 equals 0.65. As we expect this effect to be exaggerated by 36%, we may estimate that the true effect is a bias of 36%. Means that the ratio between the bias and the true odds ratio is 0.64. Thus, the true result is 0.65 over 0.64, or an odds ratio of 1.02. As an odds ratio is now about 1, it means that the antidepressant drug didn't work. My example was too simplified, as the blinding is rarely broken for all the patients, but the exercise was nevertheless very sobering. Even if the blinding is broken for only a few patients, it can be enough to render a non-significant result significant. The fact Hero Bjartson and colleagues noted in their review that the 36% exaggeration of treatment effects associated with non-blinding assessors was induced by the misclassification of the trial outcome in a median of only 3% of the assessed patients per trial, corresponding to 12 of the total 400 patients in the example. Thus, it takes very little unblinding to turn a totally ineffective drug into one that seems to be quite effective. The importance of this finding for patients cannot be overstated. Most drugs have conspicuous side effects, so there can be no doubt that the blinding is broken for many patients in most placebo-controlled trials. When we use drugs to save people from dying, it doesn't matter that the blinding is broken, as we can say with certainty whether a patient is alive or not. However, we are rarely in that situation. Most of the time, We are using drugs to reduce the patient's symptoms or to reduce the risk of complications to their disease, and the outcomes are very often subjective. For example, degree of depression or schizophrenia, anxiety, dementia, pain, quality of life, functional ability, often called activities of daily living, nausea, insomnia, cough, and dys- dyspnoea. Don't know that one. Even to decide whether a patient has had a heart attack can rather be subjective. Can be rather subjective. Hey, the randomized clinical trial is the most reliable design we have for evaluating treatments. But we have accepted much too readily that what comes out of these experiments should be believed if the trial was blinded and the main result is accompanied by a significant p-value. What is so disturbing about this is that all drugs cause harms, whereas many of the drugs we use aren't effective at all. We are therefore harming immense numbers of patients in good faith, as our randomized trials don't allow us to say which of the drugs that didn't work. On this background, it is easy to understand why companies that have shown that their drugs work for a disease that the drug was supposed to influence through its mechanism of action can later study the drug in many completely unrelated diseases and find that their drug also works for these. The unblinding is a major reason why it is so much easier to invent new diseases than to invent new drugs. It is easy to show some effect on a simple or more elaborated scale that, on top of this, many have little clinical relevance and let the marketing machine do the rest. An older member of my golf club once told me that he was uncertain whether the pills he took for his dementia had any effect. He wondered whether he should stop taking them and asked for my advice. I rarely give advice to patients, as I am not their doctor, not a specialist in the area in question, and don't have any knowledge about their medical histories and preferences. He also told me, however, that he was bothered by the drug's side effects and its high price. Given that the effect of anti-dementia drugs isn't impressive and has been established in industry-sponsored trials with highly subjective outcomes, and given the many other biases in the industry trials, I made an exception. I told him that if I were him, I wouldn't take the drug. As he was pretty demented, I doubt he followed my advice, which he likely forgot. The lack of effective blinding should make doctors much more cautious than they are. They should wait and see, think twice before they prescribe drugs to patients, write in their notes exactly what they want to obtain by using a drug, and when, and remember to stop the drug if the goal is not obtained. A convenient way to see that few patients will be helped by the drugs we give them, even if we choose to believe the results from the trials at face value, is to convert improvement rates into the numbers needed to treat NNT. This is the inverse of the risk difference. Thus, if we believe that 60% of patients receiving an antidepressant drug become better and 50% of those on placebo improve, the NNT is 1 by 60% minus 50% equals 10. This means that for every 10 patients we treat with an antidepressant, only 1 will achieve any benefit. If we accept that any possible placebo effect is so small that we can disregard it, it furthermore means that it made no difference for the other 9 patients that they received a drug apart from its side effects and cost. Even if we don't accept the findings that placebos are generally pretty ineffective, it would still be true that very few patients benefit from an antidepressant drug. It is actually much worse than this, not only because of the lack of effective blinding, but also because the 10% difference is derived from industry trials that were carefully designed to recruit those types of patients that are most likely to respond. In actual practice, the NNT is much higher than 10. If we turn our attention to prophylaxis, in other words, healthy citizens rather than patients with the disease, the NNT becomes much larger. Statins are very popular drugs as they lower cholesterol, and a trial from 1994 showed that if patients at very high risk for coronary attack receive simvastatin for 5 years, 30 patients would need to be treated to avoid one death. This is impressive, but simvastatin was very expensive in the 1990s when it was a patented drug. I therefore looked at Table 1 in the paper, which described the enrolled patients. Although 80% of them had already had a heart attack before they entered the study, only 1/3 were in treatment with aspirin, although it is a lifesaver. Furthermore, 1/4 were smokers, although all of them suffered from either angina or had a heart attack. Thus, we could have saved many lives very cheaply by reminding the physicians that their patients should receive aspirin, and also that they needed to talk to them a bit more about quitting smoking. Even brief conversations have an effect on smokers. Statins are currently intensively marketed to the healthy population, both by the industry and some enthusiastic doctors. But the benefit is very small when the statins are used for primary prevention for cardiovascular disease. When the data from 8 trials were combined in a Cochrane review, the researchers found that statins reduced all-cause mortality by 16%. This looks like an impressive effect, and this is also how the drug industry advertises their findings. However, it says virtually nothing about the benefit of prophylaxis, and we don't know what the death rate was in those who didn't take a statin. The authors reported that 2.8% of the trial participants died, noted that I don't call healthy people patients as they are not patients. What was missing in this review was the NNT, a 16% reduction from a rate of 2.8%, gives a rate of 2.35%, and an NNT of 1 over 2.8 minus 2.35 equals 222. To understand what this result means, one needs to read the whole review carefully. It turns out that the average age of some participants was 57 years, and that they weren't that healthy to begin with. Some trials only recruited patients with diabetes, hypertension, or increased lipids, and some included, in addition, some patients with previous cardiovascular disease. Further, the rate of smokers ranged from 10% to 44% in the trials that provided such data. One also needs to know after how long the benefit was obtained, and most trials ran for several years. Finally, I always look for whether the trials were funded by industry or public funds, as many industry trials never get published if the results are disappointing. Only one of the trials that provided data on all-cause mortality was publicly funded. It seems to me, which the authors of the review confirmed in the discussion section, that the 16% reduction in all-cause mortality is much exaggerated. For example, a large, publicly funded trial, the ALLHAT LLT trial, which was not included in the review because more than 10% of the patients had pre-existing cardiovascular disease, didn't find a reduction in mortality risk. Didn't find a reduction in mortality. Risk ratio 0.99, 95% confidence interval 0.89 to 1.11, which means that we are 95% certain that the true effect lies somewhere between 11% reduction and an 11% increase in total mortality. The authors advised caution in using statins for primary prevention, arguing that some trials were stopped early when the benefit was large, and that selective reporting outcomes was common. They further noted that many trials didn't report any adverse events. Although it's unlikely there weren't any, unfortunately, the abstract of the review, which is the only part most people read, gives a different impression. It notes that there was a reduction in all-cause mortality and that there was no clear evidence of any significant harm caused by statin prescription or of effects on the quality of life, and that there was no excess of muscle pain. This information is not reliable. Statins cause muscle pain and weakness, and I shall again draw on my experience from the golf course. One of my partners, a physicist scientist, told me that he needed to take statin for the rest of his life because he had a heart attack. It bothered him a great deal, and his muscle pain made it difficult for him to walk 18 holes. He also remarked that everybody else he knew who were on statin suffered from muscle pain or weakness, or both. He had looked in the research literature and was perplexed to find that few people in the trials had reported muscle pain. At this point, I revealed that I am a medical researcher, and he asked why there is such a huge discrepancy between what the patients experienced and what the literature said. I explained how tremendously the drug industry manipulates their trials, particularly when it comes to the harms of their drugs. He wasn't the least surprised. Actually, my golf partner's experience was much more truthful than the randomized trials. In 2012, I found a paper about the impact of statins on energy and In 2012, I found a paper about the impact of statins on energy and exertional fatigue. It said that although many observational reports had cited fatigue or exertional fatigue with statin use, no randomized trials had addressed this issue. The paper reported the results of such trials that found that 20% of the men and 40% of the women experienced a worsening in their energy or exertional fatigue. I have never heard any of my enthusiastic colleagues who advocated that most of us should take a statin for the rest of our lives, no matter what our cholesterol is. Say anything about this. In fact, their arguments for irrigating the population with statins are that they work and have no side effects. For many drugs, it's relatively easy to overcome the fundamental problem with breaking of the blind through side effects by using so-called active placebos. The term is somewhat misleading, as the idea is not that the placebo should contain a substance that is active against the disease, only a substance that gives a smaller side effect as the active drug. For antidepressants, trials have been performed where the placebo contained atropine, which causes dryness in the mouth like the active drugs. As expected, such trials showed a considerably smaller difference between drug and placebo than trials that didn't use any active placebo. The bias introduced by insufficient blinding can be aggravated by this fact that doctors and patients don't always do what is expected of them. Psychiatrists are usually paid per patient, enrolled, and may not bother to go through all the items on Hamilton's depression scale with the patient, as it takes time. But many use their overall impression to score some of the items without having asked, or to score later based on memory. Some patients participate in depression trials without being depressed or just to cash the money. As a healthy person told a doctor on a train ride, "I'm not depressed. The trials are advertised. The best pay is about £100 a day to volunteers. For a 20-day trial, that's £2,000. It's nice to see your regular friends." The atropine trials were performed a long time ago, and active placebos are no longer used. The reason for this is clear. By far, most placebo-controlled trials are performed by drug companies, and they have no interest in showing their drugs don't work. I believe we should require active placebos and flatly refuse to approve drugs based on trials with conventional placebos, at least in areas where the expected effects are modest and the outcomes are subjective. The companies go further than this. They often refuse to provide inactive placebos to independent researchers who wish to do their own studies. When Novo Nordisk did this, the researchers had no other option than to do the study without placebo, which was criticized as a great weakness when the study was published. In another case, Novo required that the authors dropped their idea of studying whether litraglutide, Victoza, a diabetes drug, reduced overweight, and studying whether Victoza, a diabetes drug, reduced overweight, and the company also required changes to the part of their study that concerned a possible beneficial effect on psoriasis. It may have played a role that Novo was trying to get Victoza approved for treatment of overweight, and if independent researchers found other results or more harms than Novo reported, it wouldn't be to Novo's advantage. Drug companies may try to avoid to be seen as uncooperative by demanding ludicrous sums. Wait a minute. Drug companies may try to avoid to be seen as uncooperative by demanding ludicrous sums for the placebos. Although the cost for producing them is close to zero, knowing that academic researchers would not be supported by a public funder for such excesses. On one occasion, the largest drug company in the world said that the placebos would cost about £40,000, which was enough to block an otherwise well-motivated trial. Please consider this. Doctors and patients help the companies with their trials, but companies won't help doctors and patients with their trials. This asymmetry is immoral, just as it was immoral when the imperial powers exploited the colonies. We should make it obligatory for companies to deliver placebos for independent research at low cost. In other words, the manufacturing cost as a condition for having a product on the market. Drug companies may abort important studies that threaten their income in other ways. Drug companies may abort important studies that threaten their income in other ways. Ciprofloxacin is an antibiotic that is prone to develop resistance. In 2000, when a bacteriologist asked Bayer for a supply of pure ciprofloxacin for his research into antibiotic resistance, he was asked to sign a document stating that he would not publish without written permission from Bayer. He wrote to the European Commission, but was told that the only thing the Commission could do was to remind companies of potential public interests of this type of research. Again, we should not accept this state of affairs, but make it obligatory for companies to deliver the pure drug to independent research at the manufacturing cost. I have heard many stories of blank refusals to give away or sell a pure drug sample. That's it for chapter 4.